Therese will be first.
Talk amongst yourselves. I want to thank the Personnel Services Committee, Dr. Templin, Dr. Gabriel, and my colleagues at Alexandria, my dean, Jimmy, my colleagues, Sean and Steph. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share with you what I love about teaching and to share with you what I got a chance to research, to practice while I was on my sabbatical. A few words about myself to give you some background. I've been teaching ESL at Alexandria for the last 13 years. Before that, I studied acting for about 8 years, and I was a voice coach to actors and singers in the DC area for about 4 years. I mention that because it feeds into what I did. Now, I did all of this with a very high level of anxiety, I want you to know. I was one of those students and teachers that was very nervous in front of a crowd. And that's also one of the reasons that drove me to research what I did, which was using dramatic techniques in the classroom to deal with anxiety, but also the complications of the 21st century classroom. So basically what I did during my sabbatical was I attended a weekend workshop at Arena Stage, National Association for Theater and Education. I attended a workshop down in Southern Virginia on educational kinesiology, which is the study of using the body to apply whole brain learning. I took 3 12-week online classes. I put up the resources I created onto a Blackboard site for the course one of the courses I teach to share with teachers. I taught 2 workshops at Alexandria. One of the workshops was for the ESL department on how to use dramatic techniques in the classroom. The other workshop was for the counseling department there to help deal with anxiety and communication using creative play. Another thing I got to do on my sabbatical was reflect. I got to reflect about what I'm doing in the classroom. It was such a wonderful luxury, which we never have time to do. And finally, I got to do a lot of research on the latest neuroscience that now supports all of these Howard Gardner theories on alternative styles of learning. We now have evidence, and the latest research is so exciting that we know now the brain is the plasticity of the brain. Thanks to my niece, this is a picture of the 21st century student. We're seeing lots of challenges in the classroom. We're seeing anxiety, of course, PTSD sometimes, learning issues, attention deficit, and what I call Google brain, which Nicholas Carr writes about in his book, In the Shallows. And it's really the idea, well, they have proven now through the latest technology, fMRI technology, that in fact the internet is rewiring our brain, and it's making it difficult for us to think deeply as we have. It's creating an increase in errors from multitasking. It's affecting the memory, as you can see. It's decreasing the ability to form close relations, and it's actually suppressing the frontal lobe. So I looked at how can dramatic techniques for any teacher deal with a lot of these issues in the classroom that we now have scientific proof. We can see by looking at some of this technology what happens when we are anxious. We get stuck in fight or flight. How do we get out of that? Through safety, through play, through creativity, through collaborative learning. These are some ways to get out of the amygdala, the limbic system of the brain, and into the higher centers of the brain. I thought it was very interesting that we had that book in our bag this morning. One of the findings is that we are wired for storytelling, and it's also a skill, according to Daniel Pink in his book, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. We need to learn how to tell stories, and we learn from stories. So with that, I'm going to tell you a story. A few years ago, a Russian man and his son came to my desk at work, and he asked me if he could sign up his wife for my class. And I said, well, sure, but why isn't she here to do it? And he said, she's terribly shy and introverted, and she doesn't like to talk in public at all. I said, well, it is an oral communication class. And he said, I understand that. So 2 weeks into the class, she volunteers to play Lady Bracknell, Oscar Wilde's Lady Bracknell and the Importance of Being Earnest. Just think Judi Dench in a big hat. One of the most assertive, well-carved, and comedic characters, in my opinion, in British literature. Well, we proceeded, and we had, after about 10 weeks of light rehearsals, we do several other things in the class. We don't just do that. So we rehearsed about 10 weeks just lightly. She came up on stage. She took over the stage with her commanding presence and her erect posture, with a giant hat and a flower sticking on it, and convinced us and the man that she was talking to in the scene that then, on no uncertain terms, he was not qualified to marry her daughter. She came off the scene ended, we clapped wildly, and I went up to her and I said, congratulations. And she turned to me and she said, Mrs. Aylward, I am not afraid of anything after Lady Bracknell. And I knew in that moment that there was more going on here than memorizing some text from a 110-year-old play, that we were transcending fear. We were transcending linguistic and cultural and personal barriers that had been embedded for who knows how long. So I have very little time to demonstrate a lot of what I use in my classroom and what I put up on Blackboard, but just to let you know that a lot of these techniques are available for math teachers and any teachers alike. There's several things we can do. Breathing. And I just encourage you to breathe. And we do this in my classroom. And they begin by looking at me like I'm insane, but then they ask me, can we do the breathing? So it does work. Movement exercises, believe it or not, the studies have shown that move right there, called cross crawl, can increase communication between the left and the right brain, and that's how my students walk to tests. They walk to tests doing that. So vocalizing is another exercise I use because, and one of these exercises is called the yawn sigh, and I must have gotten to the point in my career when I have nothing left to lose because I'm going to demonstrate that right now. But it's basically just, okay, and I hope you got a good look at my teeth up front here. So when you do the yawn sigh, and there's a vocal coach in Los Angeles who makes his living on that one exercise, but it's true. When you do that exercise, you get oxygen to the brain, and the voice puts you into the classroom, whether you want to be there or not. Just that vocal exercise alone brings the student back into the classroom. There's several straight drama techniques, but I want to focus on one, which is improvisation. And whether or not you never do improvisation ever in your classroom is fine. But the two principles from Keith Johnstone, who's accredited to inventing comedic improv, are: one, say yes. When you're up on stage doing an improv, you have to say yes to your partner or the creative play dies. And I've learned to look for the yes in my student and in my class. So it's helped me in my teaching. The other one is accept what is offered. And again, I apply it into my classroom discussions, and I try and apply it to everything I do in class. And then, of course, there's scenes and one-acts, which the nice thing about those are there's structure, there's safety there. And whether they memorize it or not, I never even worry about that. I worry about, are you listening to the person on stage with you? For me, acting is about listening. It's not about being a star. There's 23 stars in my room. So it's about listening, and it's about accepting what's offered. And if you memorize the script, great, and most of my students do. So the Reader's Theater is another option, and I won't spend too much time on that. I want to save a little time for one more story. And this is a story about a student I had who had trouble focusing on class. He would look everywhere except where the activity was. He was failing my class and his reading class. About 4 weeks into the semester, he volunteered to play the father in Wendy Wasserstein's Tender Offer. I said, okay, here you go, just a couple of scenes. I hoped he'd read it, maybe read it out loud using the text. He came to class for the final performance. He wore a suit. He walked on stage, which is our classroom, and he sat down at what was now the kitchen table, clearly, put his feet up on the desk, opened the newspaper, and we were riveted. We were with him from the first word to the last word. He was completely on task, on focus, and the nice thing was that his behavior changed after that, and he did pass my class, and he did come to class more often, and he did pass his reading class, turns out. I don't think I can attribute it to that, but the change was evident. I just want to thank you so much again for this opportunity to share what I love, and thank you for the opportunity for the sabbatical, and have a great year.